For today's assignment, I'm going to walk you through how to draw a bird in accurate proportion. We will be working together on this assignment. It's important to find high-resolution photos to use as your reference guide. I am always looking for the DPI, the dots per inch, for each photo. So as you can see at the bottom left-hand corner of the photos, you can see that it's over 1,000 dots per inch. That's what you're looking for. Since this is the photo that we are going to use for our reference, I'm going to use my 2 fingers and I'm going to tap my touchpad, or it's also called a right click, and I'm going to open up this image in a new tab. As soon as my photo is on a separate tab, it's important for me to zoom in so that it's ready to be used as a reference photo. If I chose a photo that had low DPI in it, once I enlarged this photo onto my screen, I would lose the clarity and the details of my bird. So that's the reason why you want a high resolution photo. I've included this reference photo in today's lesson. Please refer to this as well as following along with the step-by-step demonstration on how to draw a bird. We will be doing this together. Please create a paper strip before you begin. This will act as a ruler for you to measure out the different components. The very first thing you should do is to measure out the complete length of the bird from tail to beak, and then mark those measurements in the middle of your sketchbook. So that way, at the end of your drawing, you won't end up cropping off parts of the bird. Next, it's time to measure out the length of the body. I've already drawn the oval to give you a reference point. Make sure that you are pausing this video frequently and following along. Now that I've gathered the measurement of the length of the bird, I also want to make sure that I have the angle correct as well. In order to do this, you have to really work on your observation skills. Plus, if you take your strip of paper, measure it up against the bird, and then making sure that that angle is the same on your paper. Now it's time to determine the width of the bird. So let's measure the width of the oval. Make sure when you are gathering your measurements, you're doing this approximately in the middle of that oval. You should have 4 marks on your paper. Draw lightly during this whole process. So you have the 2 measurements for the length of the bird. Now you need to go approximately in the middle of the length and draw your measurements for the width. This next part is a little tricky. I want you to connect all 4 of those points by drawing an oval. It might take several attempts. As you can see, I'm not doing it perfectly, and that's okay because most of these lines will be erased at the end. I cannot stress enough, draw lightly. It's really important because when you go to erase most of these lines, you want to actually be able to. Let's measure out the head. So I've already drawn the circle, so you need to measure the top of the circle, the bottom of the circle, but then also include the body, that circle in the middle. Like I said before, it's really important to continue working on your observation skills. Do you see my paper strip? I have it at an angle that should be the exact same angle as when you measured. Now let's get the measurement of the width of the head. So let's line up our paper ruler, paper strip, and get those measurements. And as you go along, you're going to want to either erase those tick marks or you're going to want to get lots of strips of paper so you don't get confused with all of the measurements that you've made. Just like the body, it's timed to use those guidelines and create a circle out of those tick marks, those pencil marks that you've created. Like I mentioned before, it's really important to draw lightly throughout this process. A lot of these lines are going to be erased at the end before you apply all the details. So continue to draw lightly. I know it's not easy, but this is a really good habit to form, making sure that you press very lightly on your paper so not only can you erase those lines, but also you don't crease the paper. Now let's measure out that top wing. So I'm going to start where the head ends, or where that circle is, all the way down to the end of that triangle that I created. After you have that measurement, bring it over to your drawing. Make sure you keep with the same angle as when you measured, and draw the line. I'm relying on the triangle that I've created to get the width of the wing. As you can see at the top where the head is, it's a lot thicker than near the bottom. It's a good rule of thumb to stop along the way, making sure that all of your measurements are accurate and that you've lined everything up correctly. Now we need to know the placement of the beak and the width. I'm trying to line up my paper ruler perpendicular with the bird's head. I'm drawing an imaginary line between the beak and where the paper ruler is, and then I'm also making one of those tick marks with my pencil where the head is. Take the measurements that I gained from the photo, and I'm going to place those measurements on my drawing, lining everything up. And actually, instead of doing that imaginary line, I'm actually going to draw a really faint line so I can line up the top of the beak. Now that you know the placement of the top of the beak, you just have to line up the top of the beak to the bottom of the beak and get that measurement. Now that you have the width, now you need the length of the beak. So just line up the edge of the beak with the head, get those measurements, and then place them on your drawing. Now that you have the length and the width of the beak, it's time to really study that reference photo to determine what angles you need to apply to form the beak that looks realistic. Make sure that you are placing the beak where it's ending after the circle, after the head. It doesn't end right on that circle. Now let's measure the tail. So I'm going to line up the top wing with where the tail ends. Take those measurements and include them on your drawing. You'll probably want to measure the width of the tail as well. So when I'm measuring the bottom of the tail, I actually want to measure where the tail ends to where that white feather begins. Not only am I using my measurement skills, I'm also using my observation skills. So just make sure that you continue to use these two methods to draw in proportion. Now you need to determine where the legs begin on the bird. So line up your paper ruler perpendicular to the photo. I didn't show it here, but you probably want to have two paper rulers. One that lines up perpendicular to the photo, and the other one to measure from the paper ruler to the edge of the oval. Once you determine that measurement, go ahead and place that onto your drawing. Now you need to determine the angle of the widest part of the leg at the top and how long those legs need to be, just at the thickest part at this point. As soon as you figured out the measurements, then go ahead and apply them to your drawing.